The president of Grady White, she asked me to come on board as a consultant and do competitive analysis. I think it was 45 different boats, different brands. And I said, yes, I could do that. But then I got thinking about it. I said, these are really good boats. What am I going to really find here? Well, I found a lot. It had a couple of effects. One is they could use that data if they wish to improve their own boats, because the other guys are not stupid. They're doing good things too. But also the dealers could see that the competitors that they're selling directly against aren't 10 feet tall, that they do have these dynamic instabilities. They don't run as well, which I can quantify. Then that expanded into a competitive analysis program, which we all learned. I learned a lot about what to look for. And the dealers were able to sell against the competition without bad-mouthing them. They just say, well, here, look at this. Our boat's got an 8-inch cleat. This has got a 6-inch cleat. It's just facts.
You're listening to the Rising Tidecast, the podcast for sharing the stories, the lessons, and all the good stuff from legends in the marine industry. Welcome to another episode of the Rising Tidecast. Today's guest brings a wealth of boating knowledge. He's a renowned naval architect. He's had a long journey in the industry, and I personally met him while he was working as an international consultant for Grady White, one of my favorite brands. He's the author of Sorensen's Guide to Powerboats, and now he's in the process of launching his own boat brand, Sorensen Seaboats and Sorensen Yachts. Welcome, Eric Sorensen, to the Rising Tidecast.
Oh, Steve, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're actually one of the first people that I thought to have on this podcast, just because you're such an interesting guy, and we've had some great content experiences together. And you've got a very, very interesting and deep background in the industry. You told me you started as a U.S. Coast Guard surfman and a Navy ship driver as well. The surfman does look like such an amazing job, like one of the coolest jobs out there from an outside perspective, full of adrenaline, sitting at the helm, taking on those monster swells. What was it like? Did it live up to the hype?
No, you're not wrong at all. It's just a blast. When I joined the Coast Guard the week after I turned 17, so I got an early start, and I did a couple of years on high endurance cutters, what we used to call ocean station patrols off of Labrador and St. John's, Newfoundland. And then I went to Hatteras Inlet Coast Guard Station, where I got I'd been a coxswain. The surfman qualification is one level up from that. We had good surf on Hatteras Bar. It really was a lot of fun. In those days, we were pretty fearless, and we'd actually put the boat in the trough and roll it over. And the 44-footer has a well deck, like a cockpit, right in the middle of the boat. And we'd push each other out of the way to take the wheel to try to fill the well deck up with water and break off the HF antennas, if you go past 90 degrees. And it sounds crazy, but that actually was a good part of the training, because you could see what the limitations of the boat were and how to handle it when it really hit the fan. And it was a lot of fun also, because we used to do our own towing back then. This is a 44-footer that we had with a pair of diesels, and we'd tow 90, 100, 110-foot shrimpers from 50 or 60 miles out on occasion. And on a 600-foot hawser, shorten it up to maybe 150 feet to better control the heading of the shrimper or whatever the big boat was going across the bar. And then we'd take it on the hip. We'd take it alongside once we got in calm water outside the marina. And I'd stand up in the bow of the boat and give rudder orders and helm orders to bring it in to the marina. So I felt like a real cowboy. It was so much fun. I really loved it. It was really good training too. So I did a total of 9 years active in reserves, and did a lot of training on boat handling and towing in the reserves. And then I went to officer candidate school in the Navy, and I was on 4 different warships and a patrol boat squadron for a whole bunch of other reasons. Very good experience driving ships, going through the Straits of Messina surrounded by tuna boats and in the dark, and figuring out all those running lights moving around. It was just a wonderful experience, and I really enjoyed that part of it, the ship handling, the boat handling.
That's awesome. You'd have so many stories and so many crazy experiences out there. What is there one, like a hairy rescue from your Coast Guard days that stands out to you?
Well, none of them were hairy in the sense that somebody almost died. The only one I really got upset about was this guy had his wife and 3 or 4 little kids out on a John boat in Hatteras Inlet in 3 to 4 foot surf. A John boat literally was 6 inches of freeboard. He didn't know any better, right? And there are even more people now, 40 years later, that are doing that. Watch the Haul Over Inlet videos, to see people I don't know if they're stupid, but they certainly don't know what they're doing. Yeah. And I think there may be an opportunity to do some training videos on what different boats are capable of. You have to really watch boats that have open bows, with like a center console or a dual console. And a lot of the saltwater boats, you mentioned Grady White, have a lot more freeboard in the bow, so it it does a better job of keeping the ocean out of the boat, as we used to say, or out of the ship. But you have a lot of these boats that we call them ladle boats. The bow swoops down as you go forward. And so you get mom and the golden retriever and a case of beer in the bow of the boat. And then the guy sees a big wave coming and he chops the throttle. So you get three different things happening that shouldn't be. And you dip the bow underwater and it can easily swamp the boat. You got a little bit of water on deck or a lot of water on deck, and it can capsize the boat due to free surface effect. The water's sloshing around. So
you have some of the best commentary on boats. I would love to sit at hull over with you for a day and listen to you critique hulls. One of my favorite ones, because I've listened to you while editing for many hours. And one of the favorite that I've heard you do is we were looking at a particular boat that had an axe head bow.
Some of the axe heads are better than others. But if you see a boat with a plumb stem, in other words, take a Grady, for example, we all know what that looks like. It's got a clipper bow. So it's at an angle like this, and it's got flare. So the stem angle of the stem swooping forward, or angled forward, and the flare, as the bow goes down, it increases not only buoyancy, but lift, dynamic lift, like a dynamic because of the flow of water, right? The flow is dynamic, like the flow of air over an airplane wing. So those two things, that and a lot of freeboard, in other words, height of the bow, keeps the ocean out of the boat, basically. But when you see some of these axe head bows that have two major flaws, really, one is the stem is straight up and down. The bow of the boat is straight, it's vertical. And then there's no flare. Flare is the outward curvature of the hull in the bow. And so they're just plumb all the way around, on the side of the hull. So as the bow goes down, as it immerses, especially in a following sea, the waves coming from behind you, there's not a lot there other than some buoyancy to keep the bow from submarining, going down, 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 down. And you don't want that. And then when that happens, the bow becomes a bigger rudder than the engines or the rudders, and you lose control of it. You can yaw, and broach, which means you lose control of the heading of the boat. So a lot of them are great in a chop, but they're not good in say anything maybe above 3 or 4 feet. You really got to be careful. And once again, there are a few brands that do a much better job and that I've actually been impressed with.
I think you described it in the video that I'm talking about I think you said they're a great boat if you like aquariums. That big windscreen is fantastic for viewing the sea life when you bury the bow and you're underwater.
Yeah, this is probably right after I took one offshore in Sydney, right?
Yeah. Taking me back for a second to the Coast Guard and Navy days, is that where your love for boat design and architecture really took off, or was it before then? What drew you to the boating industry and naval architecture in the first place?
That's a really good question. I've thought about that because I've been around boats all my life. When I was a child, 4 or 5 years old, my dad used to charter a boat out of Rock Harbor on Cape Cod, New Orleans on Cape Cod Bay. That was the highlight of my year. I was so excited to go out on this boat called the Shirley L, right? It was a 36-foot egg harbor. By the time I got to be 10 or 11 years old, I started working on the boats as a mate. I'm sure I was a real pest. But I got aboard the boats and I got to go out a lot. And just the interaction, in those days, there were a lot of wooden boats, and fiberglass only started to come in a few years later. Just the interaction of the hulls. I remember standing out on the pulpit. Pulpit's a platform in the bow of the boat that lets you get out over a tuna fish, right? So I remember standing on the pulpit of a number of those boats and just watching the way the water broke off the bow of the boat and just being completely mesmerized by that. And I think that's really where you would say my love of boats and the ocean germinated right there is that experience of standing on the pulpit of these different boats and watching the way the hull, a solid object, interacted with the water. Then I worked on the charter boats quite a bit. So every minute I could spend on them, they got to be known as a good boat handler. Captain would give me $5 to take. I remember I worked on a couple of single engine boats, and then a captain gave me $5 to take his boat over and fuel it up. And it got on, it had 2 engines. And I said, what do you do with 2 engines, So that was a lot of fun having a twin engine boat to drive around. And then with my parents' blessing, I joined the Coast Guard right after I turned 17, as I mentioned. So I got an early start there too. And then went to college on the GI Bill while I was in the reserves, and then got a commission in the Navy and was fortunate to be on board 4 warships. And that's a whole nother story, ship handling.
Yeah.
And I love that too. So
it's taken it to a whole nother level, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. A 10,000 ton ship, 600 feet long. I just felt completely at home driving those ships. My last ship actually was an LST, around 600 feet, around 10,000 tons, a tank landing ship, LST. And we carried these AAVs down in the well deck of the ship, and you flood the ship. So the whole well deck inside the ship is seawater. and you'd spit these things, or you drive them in and spit them out, over the stern, and then it had a big ramp in the bow. And you could either drop the ramp right down on the beach to drive bulldozers and tanks off and trucks, dump trucks, or if it was a real shallow gradient, a long sloping bottom, you'd use causeway. So we carried these big pontoons that we joined together. I think they were 400 feet total. And you'd run that out and anchor it. We had CBs on board, these sailors trained in this kind of work. And we'd put the nose of the ship into that last causeway section and have an anchor out the stern. And just, it was really, the seamanship training was unbelievable. And I love that stuff. I ate it up. I wrote point papers on it, how to improve it and that kind of thing. So
it's such an amazing foundation too for, I think, the rest of your career, right? So what were those, some of those experiences maybe that shaped your perspective on boat design and performance while in the Coast Guard and Navy?
The number one thing for me is seaworthiness. I've developed some understanding of how planing hulls work, especially, and I've studied them very closely, not just peripherally, and I've looked for cause and effect. If it's designed, if with this shape, with this dead rise distribution, why does it handle like this instead of like that? What makes a good running boat? When I was in the Navy, we did have some hairy experiences with small boats because we had ship's captains and boat crews that didn't really know what they were doing. So I saw boats almost capsize during small boat operations. In the Coast Guard before that, when I was a teenager, we'd put the small boat, we had a 26-foot motor surf boat with a 40-horse Buddha or Westerbeek diesel in it. And we'd put that boat in the water in 20-foot seas routinely. I was qualified as a coxswain on the boat. I was qualified to run the boat deck, and they're both equally difficult jobs with manual winches forward and aft to pick the boat out of the water, tie a stopper knot fore and aft to hold the weight of the boat. I mean, the seamanship was at a very high level in the Coast Guard. So I learned a lot about how quickly it can hit the fan, and teamwork and paying attention, being alert. Not only did my love of boats flourish early on, but so did my understanding of how things can go south really quickly. And I was a damage control officer on a ship. It actually got hit by a mine in the Persian Gulf, and the crew was commended for being so well trained in damage control. But that kind of thing happens, and you've got to be trained. You got to be thinking about it. What's your immediate reaction going to be? So when my son David was little, David and I own a little Surf Hunter 25 now, a Hunt design, beautiful rough water boat. But when David was little, I'd say, "Where's your next buoy?" As you're coming around the channel. Oh, it's right there. No, that's the one you're heading towards. Where's the next one after that? So he's always looking to see where he'd be turning. You got to get a meeting situation, somebody coming right at you. Okay, come right. Well, I'm going to miss him, Dad. Yeah, but come right a little more and show him your port bow so he knows your intentions, and then come back. So all these things you do to avoid misunderstanding, to add clarity to what's going on. There's the same thing with, rules of the road, piloting, going down a channel, all these things. And I saw a lot of stuff go wrong in both the Coast Guard and the Navy. So, those two experiences just added a lot to my understanding of boats. The longest and the first chapter in my book is seaworthiness. People think in terms of, well, how far can it list to one side before it capsizes, and how much water can it take on it? And those are elements of seaworthiness. But another one is, especially relevant for a planing hull, is how fast can the boat go when the wind starts blowing? Because if you've got a really good hull, we'll go back to the Hunt design Grady White, for example, in my Hunt design boat, I can go 25 knots when a lot of other boats, even in that segment, in that saltwater fishing segment, have to slow to 12 or 14 knots because the bow is too fat and flat forward. So guess what? I'm an hour ahead of them. I'm back having a martini while they're still slogging their way in, and the wind and the waves are still building. So even the speed you're able to keep up in a seaway as it's building is an element of seaworthiness. So these are some of the things that not just experience. I mean, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and hopefully I've learned from them. Some of them a couple times before they sunk in, right?
Well, that's the important thing, isn't it? Always learning from all your experiences, whether they're good or bad. Yeah, many benefits to the seaworthiness of a hull, especially getting back an hour earlier. I like that. When you were finished with the Navy, what was it that drew you away from it?
Well, the next thing for me after that was I knew I wanted to get involved in the recreational boat industry. I thought it was very interesting to me. I'd been involved, and I owned a charter boat for a while, a 42-foot Bruno in Stillman, and I did some commercial fishing. But it had a lot of appeal to me. I thought there was a lot of opportunity there. I started off doing boat reviews for some serious magazines, not just criticizing the cup holders, but really diving into wire comparisons between two boats or even three boats. This was magazine called Powerboat Reports. That really got me looking closely at boats and not just looking at boats in a cursory way, but really figuring out why they did things well or didn't do things well. Then I had an opportunity. I remember in late 90s, I called Jamie Power up, Dave Power's son, JD Power and Associates. And I said, how come you guys aren't in the marine industry? And 2 years later, they called me back and said, hey, Eric, how would you like to run our new marine study? So I did. I worked for JD Power and Associates for 5 years and set up a marine study for them. And I learned a lot from that too. The data that you get from consumers. That was very fortunate. And I got to meet a lot of people, a lot of the presidents of all the boat companies and conglomerates, like in those days, Genmar and Brunswick, OMC. I got to spend time with them. So that was really educational. And I had an opportunity with Grady White. I did a lot of competitive analysis, looking at Grady and against their direct competitors like Whaler and Pursuit and Regulator. And I did a lot of dealer training. So once again, I had to dig down deep and really be able to tell these dealers who'd been selling and on boats all their lives. And one of them paid me, I guess, the ultimate compliment. He said, Eric, I've been selling these boats for 25 years and my dad sold them before that, but now I understand why the hulls work the way they do. I understand the physics of it or the hydrodynamics of it. So, and that's what I was being paid to do is to help people better understand how boats work so they can explain it to a customer without, and I'm a truth teller. I don't exaggerate. There's no hyperbole. This is why it works the way it does.
It's very interesting because that's one of the things that I found like most interesting about meeting you and filming with you is that you have this unique ability to take these deep concepts that might be hard for people to understand and distill them down into very understandable, basically ways for everyone to feel like they get it. You said a few things that are really important. I'd love to talk about a few of them, but when you're doing that comparison and when you're getting into the details about, why is this better than this and what makes this the way it is, how do you in your head kind of distill that down and make it understandable for the everyday boater, whether they are new into it or know the industry and the mechanics of it?
Obviously, keep it simple. First of all, say with hull design, I explain what dead rise is, the V in the bottom of the boat and how that changes from the stern to the bow. And usually when you hear a salesman talk about dead rise, the only thing he understands is what is it at the transom at station 10 all the way aft. But that's a fifth of the concept here. What's the dead rise all the way to the bow? How fast does it change? Where are the strakes? What do the chines look like? I try not to pile all that on because people lose interest. Their eyes will glaze over. If they keep asking questions, I'm glad to go down as far as they want to go. But at a dock, for example, or at a boat show, I'll walk by. I've done this with a lot of wives, a lot of women who are interested in the boats, and they don't have egos like the men do. The men oftentimes they know it all already. But we'll say, well, look at that bow and the bow of that boat and that slip, and look at the bow of this boat and this slip, and we'll just compare them. And I'll say, see how fat it is, how it's like a tugboat. It's very broad, it's flat, and it's fat. Now look at this other boat, say a Hunt design, once again, like a Grady. It's much finer. The entry, for a fish looking up, the entry looks like this, whereas on brand C, it might look like this. So they get under right away. Well, if this bow hits a wave, it's going to enter much more gradually. And you're going to feel that as a smooth, comfortable ride and a non-injurious ride, actually. If you're in the boat with a bow like this, with a wide angle of entry, then it's going to hit the wave with a great deal of impact because it's going to stop. It's going to decelerate all at once instead of gradually. And so you start with those concepts, and we talk about how high the chine is. 15 minutes later, there's so many people, if they're intelligent and they're listening, they can walk around the dock and they can give a little kind of a mini Eric critique of all the boats in the marina. Now they walk around now with a lot more understanding because they realize it's the shape of the bow of the boat. And in a 30-knot boat, you're landing on waves back to station 5 or even 6, which means halfway. Station 0 is at the bow, 5 is in the middle of the boat, 10 is the transom, so we can talk geographically. So you look at a 30-knot boat running along, a video of it or just looking at it from another boat, the boat is landing, the hull is landing in the middle of the hull. So you can't just have a sharp bow. You've got to have plenty of dead rise in the middle of the boat where the waves are hitting, kind of that bell curve of wave impact. But it's got to be less at the transom so the boat has enough stability and it has enough lift to get up on plane and run well. We could talk about maybe in some other video. In fact, we did this with Sam Short in Miami.
That was a great one and fantastic feedback about this very thing, explaining things in a way that's easy to understand, these concepts that people don't know or don't ever talk about. And now they're armed with information to make decisions that are going to impact their days on the water.
Impact literally. But it's, you know what, it's funny, Steve, that some of the physics is pretty complicated, but it's not. It's very simple. When you see the sharp bow, oh yeah, I get it. And nobody ever pointed that out to me before. Or when you're in a high speed turn, I think you and I have talked about this before. You're on an airplane and you got to go to the bathroom. So you stand up and you start walking down the aisle of the airplane. Now the pilot puts the plane in a turn. And what I say is, if you notice that he put the plane in a turn and it's starting to bank to one side, then you're about to die because the plane's about to go into a spin. You should feel no centrifugal force to the side at all. The angle of the banking of the airplane is exactly right for the turn rate and the speed of the plane, right? So it's to say, or about riding a bicycle. When you turn around a corner on a sidewalk, you better be going perfectly balanced as you're leaning over. And that depends, once again, on the speed of the boat and how many degrees per second it's turning. Now, a boat should do the same thing. It should turn like a bicycle. And it should heel. We call it heeling, when it's the dynamic forces making the boat move around. So when it heels to the side, it should be very, very close to the bank of an airplane or how far a bicycle leans into a turn. And what you can do is, I do this a lot, once again, with wives, because they're more open to this kind of thing. I'll have them hold on to the little supports that hold up the windshield on a dual console. We do a lot of these in dual consoles. And I'll say, it's calm water. It doesn't work if it's rough, but if it's calm water, I'll say, okay, close your eyes and tell me when we're in a turn. And then she says, and I keep going straight. This is my shtick, and she says, now. And I said, no, not now. And then I start to put the boat in a turn. But I come around to the wheels, 2/3 of the way over. You got to carve in a really good turn. And the person with their eyes closed won't know it. Because it's just like on the bicycle, you don't feel like you're going to fall one way or the other unless you're screwed up, right? In the airplane, you don't know you're in a turn. So, like I say, usually the woman gets it first. She knows that her family's going to be safer on this boat, because if Junior takes the wheel and spins it around thinking, oh, this will be cool, it's a non-event, because nobody's going to get thrown outboard or fall inboard because the hull is doing what it should be doing.
How important is that, though, for, I guess, how you're using or where you're using the boat? It's obviously always great to have a great hull design.
It all depends on the circumstances. The great hull design doesn't matter if you're in a river and it's flat calm. Doesn't matter as much. The boat can have instabilities. It can start to chine walk or, bow steer or whatever if it has a weight distribution problem or a hull problem. But the thing about heeling in a turn, that matters no matter if it's flat calm or offshore. And the fact that a good hull won't hook, it won't spin out. Like I've run a lot of Grady's competitors that will hook. In other words, you put the wheel hard over at 4,500 RPM and all of a sudden the stern just spins right out, right from underneath you. Some of the models, I won't name brands, but there's one brand that has 4 different hulls, and one model line will hook incrementally, like 30 degrees at a time. Another one will spin out almost 180 degrees. So it all depends on what's going on below the waterline. But so that matters whether you're in calm water or in rough water.
What would you say is the most important thing, maybe walking around from a hull design perspective, to look for at a boat show when someone's buying a new boat?
If you have a boat that, is going to be used offshore, at least part of the time, even if you spend most of your time in a big bay, if you want to go out with the swells and the waves could possibly be, lots of freeboard in the bow to keep the ocean out of the boat, to keep the bow from dipping underwater and scooping salt water into the boat. Lots of sharp entry, a fine entry, so the boat rides smoothly. And also there's a correlation between the ride and wetness, how wet the boat is. If you see a fat boat, I could pick on Carver or Marquis because they're out of business. Big fat bows, and as soon as you get past the jetties, they're almost unmanageable. They're unmanageable not only because the fat hull design makes you slow to a crawl, but because the spray, and because of the shape of the hull, goes forward and then up over the boat. It gets blown back on the bridge or on the windshield, and it really interferes with your ability to see what's going on. And that we call that situational awareness, another really big issue. So if you have a boat that runs smoother and you can run faster in a given sea state, it's also going to be drier because the spray goes out to the side and aft, so there's another happy consequence. In dead rise, 20 degrees is a pretty good number for dead rise in a 35 knot hull. Why 20? Well, if it was flat, the stern would just be just as happy going sideways when you're going with the waves, right? It would yaw a lot. It would bow steer a lot. Too much dead rise, say 24, 25 degrees dead rise on a 30 knot boat. It would take too much power and too much speed, too much energy to get up on plane. It would tend to run bow high. So 20 degrees is enough. It's kind of like Goldilocks porridge. It's not too hot, not too cold. A little bear's porridge. Is the way I describe it.
One of my favorite analogies of yours.
And as I say, Aristotle teaches us moderation in all things, not too much, not too little. So 20 degrees is that number within a degree or two in a lot of planing boats that operate in that 30 knot region to give you a lift, plenty of lift back aft. I mean, once again, back to the Grady's again. I've got video of a 285 Grady White dual console on plane, which means a clean, flat, solid wake astern at 11 knots, actually a little under 11 knots, just because of the hull shape. It runs with the bow down without using trim tabs. In other words, very little bow rise. At a boat show, I'd also look at what's the height of the cockpit deck off the ocean, off the seat, above the waterline. So that's important because you always want that deck to be above the waterline. Even when it's loaded down, you have a tuna in the boat and 6 people and, a lot of weight, full fuel. You still want to have the deck's got to be above the waterline. So the scuppers will drain in the right direction, out of the boat and not into the boat, because they'll drain both directions. And that could be 4 inches on a 20-foot boat, and it could be 8 or 10 inches on a sport fishing convertible. Some boats are full of foam, so nominally they can't sink. That also makes them quieter. If you hit an object and breach the hull, if you've got foam behind it, then that'll help to either stop or slow the water from coming into the boat. So there's all kinds of things that impact the seaworthiness of the boat and the ride, the handling. There's also equally important in my book is the helm. Okay, the helm ergonomics, how easy it is to reach everything. The wheel should be pretty much directly across from the throttles, just ergonomically. You'd reach the same distance to reach the steering wheel that you would. Your left hand's on the wheel, your right hand's on the throttles usually. And so you don't want the throttles way up here, and you don't want them back here behind you either. So just the way things are laid out, giving priority to the windshield wipers, the horn, the trim tabs or interceptors, the things that are actually used to control the boat. And you might think, well, but the horn and the windshield wiper washer is a lot more important than the engine room lights or the bait live well switch. Those switches could be anywhere. They can be way off to the left somewhere. Where's the VHF radio? Where's the joystick? So getting all these things right is very important. Some of the New England cruisers have sailboat steering wheels. They're vertical steering wheels, and they're the most uncomfortable possible arrangement. They're vestigial from the days of the sailboat when you stood up to steer it and you steered it like this, hand over hand, because you were the reduction gear. You're the engine. You're the motor, steering motor. It should be like driving a car. Everything should be set up very similar, analogous to driving your car down the road. The angle of the wheel, the distance from you, your height of eye should be similar, whether you're seated or standing. And then speaking of height of eye, what can you see from the helm when you're standing up or when you're sitting down? Do you have a big 8 or 10 inch wide mullion or frame between the two windows that you have to keep going like this to see around? Remember that you're the giveaway vessel if the other guy's between your bow and 2 points abaft the beam on the starboard side. So that whole sector, you've got to stay away from that guy. You're the giveaway vessel, right? But there are so many boats out there, Steve, that you can't even see in that sector because of the corner posts are 6 or 8 inches wide. Maybe got a sliding door to the top side that's got 6 inch wide frames. These builders, they must never have been to sea before. Some of the Italian boats and some of the British boats actually are some of the worst offenders because everything seems to be drawn with the artist's pen. It looks like you have Picasso designing a boat. All of these curves, but you know what? You can't see out of them because it's so little glass and so much fiberglass. And then you get pictures of these boats once again going out Holliver Inlet. These 70-footers, I won't name the brands, but you've got to stand up. You see this guy standing up in his 70-footer with his head through the roof so he can see in front of him. He couldn't see when he's sitting at the wheel. But guess what? He can't see anything to port because of the life raft or the radar or some other equipment up top. So these boats are running blind. And that's very dangerous. It's like flying an airplane. You got to be aware of what's going on around you. So the railings a foot high, in which case they're just tall enough to break your ankle on as you fall overboard, up in the bow. They should be 28 or 30 inches if you want to have good balance. So there are so many different things to look for when you're shopping for a boat that it really behooves you to get educated.
A lot of those things that you mentioned seem obvious, but obviously not. Is that something that you focused on a lot? Because it was a great thing that I didn't realize that you brought kind of JD Power to the marine industry, or at least suggested that and then ran a lot of that. Are those all things that really influenced the reviews that you did?
The technical knowledge that I brought to JD Power influenced the writing of the surveys. So they asked 120 questions on satisfaction and I think about 70 on quality. And so, of course, I would be involved in what questions to ask to elicit this information. So it was meaningful. So it was actually something you could use to improve the boat. So I learned from that as well. I learned it's very hard for a customer to express, and even in a 120 question survey, exactly what the problem is, because there's just not enough room to ask for written feedback. So I'll give you an example. There's two boats built in Somerville, North Carolina. The owners of the companies are related. One of them got a great score, and one of the questions was the adjustability of the helm seat, okay, or comfort and adjustability of the helm seat. And one guy got a really good score, and the other guy, who I saw after the first guy, said, "Eric, your survey's full of beans. Your whole study's worthless." And I said, "Oh yeah, why is that?" And he said, "Well, my cousin down the street, he got an 8.4 and I got a 6.2, and we used the same seat. Ha ha, so it's useless." So we went out to the plant and got on the boat, and I said, "Well, you know what the difference is? Your cousin's company has got the box, the molded fiberglass box in the deck liner that the seat is mounted on is further aft. So when you push the seat all the way aft, you can stand all the way aft as well. Your heels can move back. It's important to have enough room between you and the steering wheel as the boat comes up on plane so you can lean forward. It has to be heel room, right, for your heels. Well, his boats, the seat adjusted just as far, but the box was still too far forward, you see. So you couldn't comfortably stand up and drive the boat because you're wedged in there standing upright. And when the boat comes up on plane, you can't lean forward. So, you ferret these things out in pretty short order if you look at the boats. I will say, Steve, that certainly as I did as a young teenager in the Coast Guard, I was never critical of the boats. I said, "Oh, this is designed by the Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard, the 44-footer. It'll roll over and come back up again." You're trained, it's even a professional captain. Most professional captains are not the ones you want to ask about improvement. Some of them are, some of them are not. But what would you do to improve the boat? Well, most of them don't even think that way. They think about how do you run the boat safely. Then they do a great job. And they have a great deal of experience doing that. But what you find is that there are many boats from the very top brands in the United States that in many ways are poorly designed. They could be safer, they could run better, they could be drier, smoother, they wouldn't have dynamic instabilities. I guess what I have is the inquisitive eye. And doing those boat reviews for Powerboat Reports where I had to write everything down, it's in the writing that I learned about boats. I wrote tens of thousands of words directly comparing boats. So I couldn't just in a cursory manner run over the differences. I had to really study why can you see better from this boat? Why does this boat have less bow rise? Why is that seat more comfortable? Why is that fish box in a better location? Because I had to analyze it. And then I had to go talk to the builder and convince him, which I've done with many builders, why this other one is better. And they don't take it sitting down. Some of them do. It depends on the evidence. But you have to be a little stubborn,
Were many people open to those kind of suggestions? Because, from an outside perspective too, you'd think, well, I'd love for my boat to perform better and, be more desirable and tick all these things that are really important, but maybe missing the mark on.
A lot of people don't think about these issues like visibility from the helm, for example. So my yardstick is sitting at the helm of a 35-foot express cruiser. Anytime you take away 1 degree of horizon from me, 1 degree, you have to be able to justify it structurally, not aesthetically, because you want a swoopy windshield in the back or because this looks cool. But you should be able to see from the lower station almost as well as you could from a flying bridge of a boat that has no structure at all. You should be able to see all the way around, and that includes back aft. And so when I point out things like this, some excellent naval architects, but they don't run the boats. So they put these frames in between the windshields. They maybe have 3 windows across the front. The frames are 6 or 7 inches wide. If you do the trigonometry from your head, your eyes, to that 6-inch wide piece of wood, maybe you've got 12 degrees of horizon you can't see because of that one obstruction. But you don't need that 6 or 7 inch wide. You can do it structurally with 2.5 inches, say. Then your binocular vision will see right through it. So that's undeniable. Other things, I think it depends on if I can be convincing. It's their baby a lot of times. A lot of these companies are run by people that founded them or their dads, or they belong to their parents. So there's their baby. So there's naturally some reluctance. So part of the art of doing what I do is being as inoffensive as possible and saying, listen, and maybe compliment, because all these boats have good points too. But some of them have some real, you shake your head and think, why did they do it this way? It doesn't make any sense.
So, I mean, that's really interesting because, your transition from JD Power to then a consultant and then doing that for Grady White for many years. Like, I see them as a very special company. And in the beginning, what made you find out, or how did that relationship start for you?
I would go to all these companies each year, probably 40 different builders that were in the JD Power study, everything from bass and pontoon boats to what we call coastal fishing boats like Whaler and Regulator and Pursuit and Grady. So I met a lot of the owners and the presidents and vice presidents of these companies. And I was able to work with them and give them some insight, not just, it's got to be actionable data. It's not useful to anybody unless you won the award, which Grady White did every year for the 7 years of the study. So we got to know each other. After 5 years at JD Power, I decided I wanted to do something a little different. And I was also ready to put this new skill or this application of data to work. Chris Carroll, who was and is the president of Grady White, found out that I was leaving JD Power, and she asked me to come on board as a consultant and do competitive analysis. I think it was 45 different boats in their segment, different brands, and I did that. I did an analysis of 45 different models, and I'm not so hubristic that I didn't think that would be quite a challenge, but I never show that. And if somebody says, Eric, can you do this for us? I always put my hand up and say yes, and then I figure it out.
A very good quality for being successful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because you have to have some boldness, but you also have to have a little humility, and you have, or you're just not going to get anywhere, right? Or not as far. And I said, yes, I could do that. But then I got thinking about it. I said, these are really good boats, that they're direct competitors to Grady White. What am I going to really find here? And I found a lot. I found a lot of things that could be improved. It had a couple of effects. One is Grady could use that data if they wish to improve their own boats, because the other guys are not stupid. They're doing good things too. But also the dealers could see that the competitors that they're selling directly against aren't 10 feet tall, that they do have these dynamic instabilities. They don't run as well, which I can quantify. Their passageways, their companionways are not as wide. Their bunks, their burrs are not as long. The cleats are smaller. They don't have what Grady calls remote operating gear to close the seacocks without having to crawl down in the bilge. And these are all things that I found out because I was paid to. Then that expanded into a competitive analysis program, which we all learned. I learned a lot about what to look for. And the dealers were able to sell against the competition without bad-mouthing them. They just say, well, here, look at this. Our boat's got an 8-inch cleat. This has got a 6-inch cleat. And anybody who's ever tried to tie up a 1/2-inch line to a 6-inch cleat knows you can barely do it, and it's impossible to put 2 lines on it, right? If you have a spring and a breast line on the same cleat. So these are it's just facts. I take a picture of a tape measure on a companionway. The Grady's was 24 inches wide. The other guy's is 17. The hatch is 20 inches instead of the other guy's being 17. And then you think, well, that hatch is in the cabin is there not only to let the sunlight and the fresh air in, but to let you out in an emergency. It's called emergency egress. And a 20-inch hatch is a lot easier to get through than a 17-inch hatch, especially that a lot of Americans that are big people. But people never notice this unless you point it out to them. They just don't. Even the builders don't notice the difference so much between their boats and other boats.
It's such an amazing way to show the value of, I think, your boat subtly, and also give value to the dealers that sell your boats. Is that something that all boat manufacturers do? They hire someone like you to do that competitive analysis and arm their salespeople and their team and want to get better and do that?
The timing was right in a lot of ways. I was available. I was looking for something to do. Grady White's president is a very intelligent and a perceptive person who saw that this would add value. It would make it both for the customers who'd get a better boat for it. There's this, expression, axiom that, enthusiasm can be infectious, Steve. It can spread from one person to another. So you think about a dealer now is better armed. He knows why the boats run like they do. He knows why this one doesn't run well. He doesn't just put it out there. He says, this is what's wrong with the hull. He can say that now because I've spent 2 or 3 sessions with each dealership, 65 dealers. I did a lot of traveling for a while. So they're more confident. And when they're more confident, that shows. They're not braggadocious. They're not show-offs. But they have a confidence now because they understand the product at a deeper level, not only theirs, but the other guys. That's going to come across to a customer as the dealer representing a better product. Now, that could be invalid. Maybe it's a great salesman, but a lousy boat. But in this case, you have a salesman who's better trained, better motivated, more confident because he understands the product more, and he knows a lot more about selling and closing than I ever will. That's not my forte. Now he's got a real toolbox to work with. And I think that's the value.
And how I met you through, Sam and Ryan at Short Marine. I think that's one of the key things that help them set Grady apart from its competitors locally. And, they take people out on sea trials and compare brands and, same day, same sea, see how this rides and explain that and, use the terminology that you shared with them. And
yeah, it really works. I will tell you that Sam and Ryan Short in Sydney, Australia, who you and I have done a lot of videos with them and with Sam in particular. I've had more fun working with those two guys. They're my kids' age, but I've had more fun working with them because they love boats. They love rough water. Especially Ryan will get out there, and I was running a 37-foot Grady and videotaping Ryan in a 257, a 25-foot center console. And I'm just, I'm hanging on in this 37-foot, 18,000-pound boat, going out through the heads out in the Atlantic off Sydney. Now, Sydney is almost always rough, right? The seas coming in, big seas, big swells. So they did a screen grab of the video, and I'm kind of looking over once in a while. And not only the boat, the propeller on the outboard was about 3.5 feet out of the water. Not the hull, the outboard, the propeller. Was a big grin on his face, right? I love that. I love their enthusiasm. I love the skill. It's the same thing that I did as a 17-year-old driving 44s in the Coast Guard. Very high-level people, and they're running a great business. But it's so much fun to do videos with those guys because they're completely uninhibited when it comes to, and they're not stupid. They understand what the limitations, their physical and the boat's limitations. So I love that kind of expertise where they know how far you can push a boat. And then, of course, we have fun. There's a lot of humor in it. Nobody wants to just listen to somebody droning on like I am now.
No, I've heard you guys together, and it's a fantastic duo, whether you're with Ryan or Sam. And
yeah,
watching Ryan when he's driving the actual boat that we're shooting, it's a completely different experience. Most recently, I think the one that surprised me the most is when the 54C, the Viking, came in, and he's running that thing like it's that, 20-foot Grady.
I was with him on the bridge the whole way down, for 5 hours offshore,
with no clears, right?
No canvas and no plastic at all. I said, and that's me at 30 years old. Exactly me. So what I started to say with Ryan and Sam, they've got kahunas too, right? So what they do is they'll have a demo event for Grady White. They might have everything from a 23 up to now a 45. They put them on a raft or on a floating dock out towards the entrance of the harbor. So the boats they don't have to come all the way back into the marina. Okay, so they ferry people out to this floating dock with this old Riviera. I think they converted into a ferry boat. But so what they did is they take so picture this, Steve. They take 5 or 6 Grady's, for this size range. And then they take, I won't say which one it is, but they take one of their primary competitors' express cruisers, a 34-footer, and they put it right on the same dock. And they say to all the customers that come out there, and this brand used to be really popular in Sydney, and they say, here, take brand B out, take it for a spin. And the guy would take it out. It's only a mile to the heads from there. So they take it out and they run it through these literally 6 to 12-foot swells with maybe a 3 or 4-foot chop on top. It's heaven, for somebody like me that loves that. And you come back, then you get in the Grady, even in a smaller one. So they get in that 34-foot competitor's express, and then they get in the Grady 306 center console, and they're astonished at the difference in the ride, let alone a 33 or a 37 Grady that's the same or a little bigger. So, but that just shows their confidence in how these are Hunt hulls, which I have enormous respect for. It's one of the best moves that they ever made. Eddie Smith was telling me about how they hired John Dectatel's company, Ray Hunt Design, C. Raymond Hunt Associates, to design I believe a 28-foot sailfish. And so he and the president of the company at that time, Wiley Corbett, took their other biggest boat and the new Hunt design back, and they went out in the Sound in North Carolina, and they went back and forth between the two boats, I guess for the whole afternoon, and they were amazed at how well that Hunt ran. Eddie told me that within 3 years, all of the Grady Whites were Hunt designs. And that is one of the strokes of genius on Eddie's part and his management team's part, and because they just run better. They do. So for me, I know people think, well, that's all you care about, Eric. It's not really not. It's the foundation of a boat. Why would you buy a boat that is not going to run well? Well, I never go offshore when it's rough. Well, you're going to come home when it's rough, right? Unless you don't go offshore, unless you're a floating gen palace. But if you're going to go out and use your boat, the wind's going to pick up, or you're not using it the way a boat should be used. So why not buy get a boat that's smoother, which means more comfortable. It also means safer. You think about these open bow boats, which are so vulnerable offshore in a way because of their open bows. And if it gets really rough, I mean, I've taken water over the bow of my 30-foot Grady, you know. But if you think about the fact that you can go faster in a given sea state, it makes a big difference. And the fact that they do have more freeboard. But you also think about even in a 2-foot shop in Cape Cod Bay, if, you know, maybe your wife and your kids and your friends are all sitting, they all sit in the bow. That's all where they always go, especially in a dual console. So you're going to sit up in the bow, and you're running along at 30 knots in a 2-foot shop in a hunt hull, like a Grady. Then you take brand B, C, and D that don't run well. They're not going to be able to ride in the bow of the boat. The bow is the most active part of the boat, right? Most vertical accelerations. So they're either going to have to slow down, which is what they end up having to do. So with a good running boat, you can use that open bow as the wind picks up, 2-3-foot chop at 30 knots in a 30-foot boat. Whereas brand B and C, you're going to take a pounding, you know? So that's right there is a really good reason to have a good running boat, because everybody likes to ride the bow of an open bow boat.
You don't want to be flying out.
Or needing spinal surgery, you know? Because for seaworthiness reasons, for functionality reasons, start with a hull. If it doesn't have a good hull, go to the next brand. It doesn't matter how much you like the windshield or the cabinetry down below in the cabin or anything else. If it doesn't have a good hull design, don't even consider it, unless you're consigning yourself to staying inside the jetties. But I remember just having to be on a carver when people would go aboard them at boat shows, you know, in a convention center. The boat's high and dry on blocks in a convention center. And I remember seeing these people, and it was about a 44-foot carver, 45, something like that. And a couple went down below, and she said, the woman said to her husband, "Look at this, honey, there's a king-size bed and his and her closets in the bow. Let's get this one," right? Well, they got it, but they also found out when they actually put it in the water, as soon as you head out past the jetties, it's unmanageable. Why? Because the hull has to be shaped like a tugboat. Big fat bow, flat and flat, in order to fit a king-size bed and his and her closets in the bow of a 45-footer. Go on a sea trial, but beyond going to sea trial, go on a bunch of sea trials so you see what's good and what isn't.
You've given us some great tools for not only new boat owners to look out for, but you know what should be important for dealers to look at and talk about. You worked for Grady for a long time and saw many people and influenced many dealers throughout the world. You know the impact that you've had on guys I know like Sam and Ryan. How does that kind of impacted you looking back, thinking about all those people that you've helped throughout the years?
You know, a lot of it, maybe it sounds kind of corny, it comes down to kindness. You know, are you kind to the people around you? And how can you be kind? How can you be a good person in the Socratic sense of good? Well, you tell the truth. And there's different ways to go about doing that. And you help where you can. If they don't have my knowledge about boats, and you're another guy in my age or whatever age, and you've got an ego, then I never teach them. Okay, I always share what I'm doing with them. Like if I'm driving the boat and I'm really teaching them about the boat, but also maybe piloting and rules of the road and that kind of thing. I'll always put it like, you know how when you do this, you know how when you trim the motors like this happens, and they always say yes. I'm not pedantic about it. Okay, so I share it with him as though, and he is an equal, maybe not in this particular area, but he's just a guy like me, right? And if you treat people, that's treating them with kindness. And then usually the wife is watching what's going on, and she'll say, you know, listen to this guy. But usually you treat him with kindness. That means you treat him like an equal, which he is in every way. And next thing you know, he's listening to me. And he never did really know how to trim the engines out, or he never did realize this about the helm, or, you know, whatever the issues were. And the relationship changes from me trying to sell him a boat to more of I don't know if it's a stretch to say, sort of a mentor or a friend.
A guide, yeah. A helpful guide.
Guide in the process. So that's all there is to it, is you share what you know. You could fill volumes with what I don't know about all kinds of subjects, you know. But this is something I do happen to know something about, and you share it in a kind way with some humility. And it's always a dialogue, back and forth. And the same thing with the dealers. I've learned so much. You know, I go there to nominally to teach them about boats, and I learn every time I go on a dealer visit. I learn something, you know. And just great people, just wonderful. I've met very few people in this industry that I just don't like. From presidents to laminators, there's very few people that are just disagreeable. And you can always find something, you know, in common or, you know, common ground. that you can base a friendship on. And I developed a lot of friendships in that way.
It's a wonderful part about this industry.
I mean, look what we're doing, Steve. We're selling joy. So we're supposed to do it. It's called Pleasure Boat for a reason.
What's one of the things that you love most about consulting?
Oh, I like to travel. I liked meeting new people. I liked being able to share what I know about boats. I like learning about boats whenever I travel. Seeing how different people's minds work, when it comes to assimilating the information or how they think about it and, a little bit differently than I do. And that's great, and I incorporate some of what they know into my training sessions or into my life or whatever.
What's one of the biggest learnings or takeaways from your years of consulting, if you think about it, from looking back on your journey, or, all those times at a 10,000-foot view? What would you say is one of the biggest things that you learned that changed your perspective?
People are a lot more alike than they are different. Whether they're buying or selling boats, or cars or anything else for that matter. I really enjoyed the human interaction. I loved teaching at a deeper level. I loved being able to have somebody ask question after question after question about boats. I remember there was a woman turned out to be very wealthy at the Newport Boat Show in Rhode Island, and we started talking about hull design. We talked. She was probably in her 70s, and you'd never know she had any interest, but she just kept asking more and more questions. I'll crawl underneath boats with people and talk about the hulls. I've crawled underneath boats, like the radius keel on a hunt hull, and why that's there. What does it do for you? And if they're sharp, they get it. They get it. They know it's not baloney. It's real. And so seeing that transformation from hardly understanding anything about what we're talking about to, all of a sudden they know 4 times as much about boats as they did 2 hours ago. They'd run them, but they weren't tuned in on all these details that really matter.
That's got to be rewarding.
It is because, and also if you do it enough, like I did it a lot, you can kind of distill the pitch. But you read, what are you interested in? I don't want to force feed them something they're not interested in. But if they go off in a certain direction, well, we can talk about propulsion. We can talk about, cockpit drainage. We could talk about the cabin dimensions. We can, whatever you want, and just stay with them. And it's wonderful to see light bulbs going off. So that's one of the big things I took away from this.
I love that. From transitioning from a consultant to now, being in the stages of bringing your own brand to life, Sorensen Seaboats and Sorensen Yachts. What is it that you took from that to start your own brands? And then also what motivated you to make the leap and do this for yourself?
I guess maybe at heart, I'm a risk taker, but I've also been looking at other people's boats for a long time, since I was a child, really. And I've developed, lists of features and attributes that should be included in any boat, in my view. And I'm able to distill all that and put them in a boat. Like I've got a 29-footer that we've got the tooling. We've got the hull number 1 has been infused and built, and we've got a 46-footer that it's ready to build in Turkey. It's a competitor directly against Sabre and Palm Beach and East Bay and those guys. Fantastic hull. It's got the Hunt hull and a lot of features that are the product of all my thinking and investigating and pulling the string. And we also have a 52 in the wings that we're in the initial design stages of. So these are going to be fantastic boats. They're going to be among the best running in the world, safe. The sight lines from the helm will be almost like sitting on the bridge, like my criteria states it should. The ergonomics will be like driving a Mercedes. All these things are going to be incorporated. Topside safety, you're not going to fall. You're going to have a hard time falling overboard. Very seaworthy boats. So that's where it's brought me at this stage in my life to developing my own boats and putting them out in the marketplace. So
very excited to see them on the water. I mean, starting a boat brand, right? You've worked in the industry. You've seen small, large boat brands of all sizes. Now that you're actually doing it on your own, what's been one of the biggest challenges in starting your own boating brand?
Money, funding. It's very expensive to start a boat company, and it's risky. So I think the risk is mitigated by having a better design. When I can talk to investors and convince them that it's a better design, just like I do with dealers and with customers that I have for many years now. I know my business, I know the boats, but getting the dollars, getting the startup money is really the biggest challenge. And then of course you have to have an infrastructure. If you don't have your own plant, then you have to hire somebody else to contract build the boat for you, and that takes some of the profitability out of it. And then you have to decide are you going to have dealers or not, because the dealers will take a margin, 20, 30%, depending on the size of the boat. And so you've got to make all that calculus work, so that you can build the boats cheap enough so the builder can make his money, the dealer can make his money, and there's enough for you to live on and to expand the line. I think my biggest advantage is having boats that really, in so many ways, in my view, are better than everything else that's offered out there.
Be a fine line of business and an art to making that work.
Very much. And part of the art is designing obviously designing the boats to start with so they look attractive. People are taking a chance on a new name, both customers and dealers, if you sign dealers on. And the numbers have got to add up. At the end of the day, you got to be making money. So everything's got to come out and work well. And you got to surround yourself with the right people. Like with the Sorensen Yachts effort, which we've been working on for a number of years, I've got a fantastic CFO, Craig Emmerich. He's a banker. I can spell EBITDA, and I know a little bit about the financials, but Craig knows numbers. He also knows boats. He owns a Hunt Design Chris Craft with IPS power. And Drew Jameson has done a bunch of startups, MIT startups. So he's familiar with starting businesses. So these are some of the people who have been instrumental in helping me with things that I don't know as much about. And so that's important to know what you don't know as well as what you do.
Network plays such a huge role in this. I think a lot of success can be attributed to who you know. And thinking about your network and, back to the JD Power days and meeting all these, heads, CEOs of boating brands, and what role did your network play in your career? And then if you can think about maybe what's one opportunity that you think you wouldn't have gotten maybe, or it was really drastically affected by the people that you know and wanting to help you.
The networking is essential. Not burning any bridges for sure. That's the absence of a negative, but developing a reputation, which was really easy to lose. A reputation is somebody who knows what they're talking about, that plays well with others, is just as important, that gets along with other people, is able to work together as a team. That team dynamic is really what's so important. Well, the networking, going back to Chris Carroll at Grady White hiring me over 15 years ago initially, that was because of JD Power, and I'd met the team there at Grady by visiting them every year, and I've got other opportunities, people that know me. I mean, it's a small industry. If you've been dishonest or incompetent or in any way not kept your word, then the word's going to get out. So it's important to do the right thing, not only because it's the right thing, but because it's a pragmatic consideration very much, to treat people well in every respect.
Super important. We met each other through filming with Short Marine, like we mentioned. And I know from conversations with you, you've enjoyed the content that we made together and see it as being a little bit different, I guess, or unique in the industry, especially for the stuff around Grady White and Short Marine. So I'm interested to hear from you, like, what impact do you think creating some quality story-driven video, what do you think that has impact-wise on boating brands and their customers?
I think it can have quite an impact. Word of mouth, we'll start with that, is the most effective kind of advertising. Your neighbor tells you he loves this new car that he bought or this new ride-on lawnmower or whatever it is. It's a lot more effective than all the ads you read in a magazine or online. And by the same token, having people tell you that they like their boat, that it's treated them well because it's honest, that the source is reliable. By the same token, with a video that's not hype and hyperbole and smoke and mirrors, first of all, if it's true and it's presented in a way that people actually learn something from it, you've got a calm approach. And you say, yeah, this person is genuine in the way they're coming across here. I'm learning something from them. And what he says or she says makes sense to me. Then that's almost as good as word of mouth. So I think the marketing has to be real. It can't be choreographed. With choreographed dialogue and choreographed, everybody wearing the same color shirt or making it look like a Hollywood script. If it's genuine, that's going to be effective. That's where I think the shorts are so good because they don't care. They'll go out there, they'll have a beer in their hand, like everybody does, when they're driving the boat, or they're having a great time. They're catching fish. They're out in rough water with a boat. Like I said, with Ryan, the boats come out of the water. That enthusiasm is contagious, right? Not only infectious, but contagious. And you say, wow, I want some of that. With the videos that you and I have done with Sam and Ryan, I think it's the same thing. It's Sam and I just bantering back and forth. We're not making anything up. We're talking about how the boats run or how to handle a boat in rough water or whatever it is, or docking it, or whatever we're doing. And you can point out some of the things about that particular boat. Certainly the offshore handling. It's compelling, right?
And I think one of the most important parts too of a great video and a great story is the character. So it's how unique they are and how well you connect with them.
Yes.
And
yes.
so to have an authentic version of that, it really connects with people, especially with you and Sam. The amount of banter and bloopers that I've had that may never see the light of day, but
No.
people connect to that when they see you guys on screen or when they hear you make a joke. I think the other day posted a video you did on like a 375 talking about the boarding ladder, and I think you said like, oh, it's great for anyone unless you're a gymnast or something like that. So I think cracking those little jokes, I think are really great, and it's a way to infuse personality into the videos that we do. It's a way to say, hey, like, this is me. I'm not.
You're being real, just
Yeah.
like two friends
That's right.
shooting the breeze about a boat.
Over your course of being in the marine industry, how have you seen marketing change?
I hate to say it, but my honest reaction is it's become fluffier as time goes on. I liked the ads from the 60s and the 70s, especially the print ads, a lot better than today. Now you talk about this, look at this enormous cockpit and this, mega yacht sized salon, and it's just hyperbole. You have to use your dictionary and your thesaurus to write these ads. I used to write ads for Viking all the time, and they were to the point, short and to the point, but well written. A little bit of prose if I hit the mark. Try to make a little bit of humor once again, even with Viking in those days. And with Viking in those days, they were just literally leapfrogging over Hatteras and Bertram, and that's a whole other story in itself. What Bob and Bill Healy did, and what Bill Healy's son Pat has taken the company to a whole nother level. But it was Bob and Bill, the brothers. Bill was the boat builder, Bob was the lawyer businessman, and the two of them had their own swim lanes, and they got along well, and they argued, and they like any brothers do, but they produced this machine, this fantastic machine that's got, I don't know, it's got over 1,000 people working in 1 million square feet of, I don't even know, I've lost track.
Yeah, it's giant.
They're giant. They're something like 70% of the industry, of that industry, by themselves, because it's family owned. They can do anything they want. They listen to each other. They've got a fantastic, dealer network. One of my experiences, I used to go there for a week every month for about 5 years. And I'd stay in the captain's little lodge or little cabin there in the parking lot, and I'd work with Kathy McCausland, Bill's daughter, on marketing. And I remember they launched what was then a 68, and it had a pair of 1,800 horse Deutz diesels in it. This was 1998 or something like that. They put the boat in the water, and I'm, lucky enough to be there when they put the boat in the water. And Bob and Bill and Bruce Wilson and a few other, they're one of their head engineers, were looking at the boat and talking, and Bob and Bill are going back and forth. And then I heard Bill yell out, "Bruce, make it a 72." So they thought it looked too short, right? At 68 feet. So they hauled the boat out of the water. They added 4 feet onto the cockpit, and that became the Viking 72 from the late 90s. And I thought, well, that is emblematic of how that company has been such a success.
How cool to be there for that too.
Yeah, I know. I know. And I'm sure a million things like that have happened. I just happened to be I was lucky to be there to watch that. Make it a 72. No board meetings, no, what's the financial impact going to be? How much is this going to delay are we going to go to Lauderdale now, or are we going to have to wait till Miami, to introduce it? It was just make it a 72. You try to learn something from everybody you come across here, but, Viking is a machine. They're also the ones who were instrumental in ending the luxury tax in the early 1990s. And which just, Viking went from 600 to 80 employees because the idiots in Congress imposed a 10% tax on the price of the boat above $100,000. So they think, oh, we'll make X. They think it's a zero-sum game with money. It isn't, as anybody with any brains knows. So they imposed this 10% luxury tax on the boats. The Viking yachts shut down. Everybody, Hatteras and Bertram, were ahead in those days. And I think they were also they were owned by corporations. And Viking was owned by the Healys. So during that luxury tax period when everybody shut down, they went down to 80 employees, and they came out with 2 new boats, 2 new models. I think a 58, and I'm not sure what the other boat was. So when the luxury tax was ended, which they were instrumental in doing, by the way, by shipping busloads of workers to D.C., to testify to Congress, Bertram and Hatteras were languishing. They fired all their people and they were shut down to parade rest. Well, the luxury tax was listed, and Viking came out of the gate with these two brand new models. They say that in their marketing, and I wrote about it at the time because I was writing marketing materials. But it's true. It's like when I talk about hulls, it's true what I'm saying. It's true how Viking leapfrogged over Hatteras and Bertram, which are both a shadow of their former size and prestige and impact in the industry compared to Viking because of that period of time and because of the leadership and management at Viking at that time. And now Pat's doing a great job.
Yeah, with the new speed restrictions. He's doing the same thing. But I think it's a testament to them, right, of saying, this is our industry.
So you do see leaders like that in the industry and strong personalities, which we need. You need strong personalities doing the right thing. It's like Churchill said, my dad was a tank driver in World War II, and he named his golden retriever Churchill, and he did it because Churchill said what? Never, ever give up. He said a lot of things, but it was this tenacious bulldog personality that he had, and as a brilliant orator, he could convince people through rhetoric, of his position. Not all of them, but enough of them. That's the same sort of tenacity, and sometimes what would be construed as by an outsider as bullheadedness, but it's really tenacity. You see the target, you see the light, and you keep heading for it. So
that's fantastic. Eric, I have some, let's do this last little bit, some rapid fire questions for you. We'll keep it light, keep it funny.
Okay.
First thing that comes into your mind. Favorite harbor in the world?
The one that has the most emotional attachment for me is Rock Harbor in Orleans on Cape Cod, because that's where I grew up.
Biggest sea you've been in?
When I was 17 and 18 years old in the Coast Guard off of Labrador, and they were reported as 55 feet. And it was on a 255-foot lake-class cutter called the Chautauqua.
Best part about being a naval architect?
Well, I'm not a degreed naval architect, but the way I put it is a lot of them read my book.
What's the most unique thing you've ever seen on a boat?
Well, when it first came out, I'd say it was Seakeeper. First time I went out on a boat that had a Seakeeper, it just blew me away.
What do you think from a naval architect's perspective is the worst feature you've seen on a boat?
When they get things like the liquid load, particularly the fuel tanks, it's not really a feature, it's a mistake. They got the balance of the boat off. If you put the fuel tank too far aft of the center of buoyancy of the hull, as you burn fuel, the stern's going to come up and the bow's going to go down. Now, sometimes the boat will run better because it's stern heavy, but usually it doesn't. So ideally, you'd have the fuel over the center of buoyancy. But the problem there is that's usually where the engine room is, right? That's where the engines go. But it can be done to an extreme. You can put it further aft than it needs to be, or maybe you have room for saddle tanks outboard in the engine room so that the boat comes up on an even keel. Ideally, when you burn fuel, the bow comes up, because the faster a boat can go, the more you want the bow out of the water, right? For control and for efficiency. But you're fighting against the reality of where the engines, where the water tanks, where's the midship's master stateroom bed going to go? What about the headroom?
What's the best piece of boating wisdom that you've ever heard?
Pick a boat that suits how you're actually going to use it, not how you dream you're going to use it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't follow your dreams. That's a different subject, which I've been doing. How are you going to use this boat on a daily basis? Are you going to go from Boston to Nova Scotia? Are you going to stay in Narragansett Bay? How many people are you going to take out? Are you going to use just days? A lot of people buy day boats now, even center consoles, and they'll stay in a hotel every night, Get a very clear idea of how are you going to use the boat? How many people are going to go out? Is it day trips only? And then find a boat in the size range. Get the biggest boat you can afford is another bit of advice, because you're never going to go offshore. It doesn't matter how rough or calm it is, and say, geez, I wish I was in a 40-footer now instead of this 45. And the same thing goes for engines. And most boats are outboard powered these days. And a lot of people, when you're in the 24 to 26 foot range, 27, you can put a big single engine on, or you can put a pair of smaller engines on. And people ask me all the time, what would you do? And I'd say, well, put it this way, like my other comment, if you're out of sight of land, and that might be only 6 or 7 miles, not 20 or 30 miles, you're never going to look back at the stern of that boat and say, geez, I wish I didn't have that port engine. I wish I only had the starboard engine. It's the pleasure and pleasure boat. Part of the pleasure, even for an old salt, is being able to relax. Not all the way. If you get relaxed too much, you're going to get into trouble. Always have a little bit of fear. The ocean could be a fearsome place. But you can relax a little bit more if you've got 2 engines. If your boat's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit more comfortable. If it's unsinkable. If you have a life raft that'll hold everybody on board plus 50% up on the roof. So you're not worrying about your family. You're attending to their safety by being smart and educated and attentive.
Great words of wisdom. Thank you, Eric. How do you want to leave us today?
Oh, I don't know. It's been a great ride, and I think there's a lot ahead for, hopefully my endeavors will take off and see some success. We've got a great product, a great team. Sorensen Seaboats, SEABOATS.com for a little advertising, a little plug, or Sorensen Yachts for the bigger boats. If somebody wants to talk to me about possibilities, I'm happy either as an investors or as buyers of the boats or as both. Love to talk to them. And I'm also, Steve, I've really enjoyed doing videos with you because you understand a lot of video people that I've worked with before really don't know boats. You know boats. So it's a lot more fun working with you. And then when you add the shorts to the equation, like we've done a lot of times, it's just a lot of fun for me. I can't imagine I'm getting paid to do it.
It's a good recipe. That's what it's all about, isn't it?
It really is.
Having
Find the right
fun.
people to work with.
Oh, thank you, Eric.
Right.
Thank you for that. Well, thanks for also all your insights, stories, and wisdom today. There's so many knowledge bombs dropped in this episode. Anyone can take away something that's in the boating industry, I think, from it. So we appreciate you so much and sharing that with us.
Well, I've really enjoyed my time with you, and let's do it again sometime soon.
Sounds good. And for anyone looking to learn more about boat design and performance or Eric's work, check out his book, Sorensen's Guide to Powerboats, invaluable resource, and also check out Sorensen Yachts and Seaboats. I can't wait to see them on the water, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Me too.
And also to everyone listening, let us know what you loved about today's conversation. Love to share more stories of legends like Eric in the marine industry. So if you have someone in mind, send them my way, and we'll catch you next time on the next episode of Rising Tidecast.